Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today is May 30th, 2024, and let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, this is going to be a very quick update, and first of all, we're going to talk about what happened last night. And some pretty big explosions happened around the Kerch area. And some of us were thinking that this could perhaps be the end of the bridge, but it's still standing, and the Ukrainians actually hit something that right now could be more valuable for the Russians, and that is the ferries. And it's been confirmed by the Russian media that indeed the Ukrainians were able to damage, and to be very fair with you, destroy two very important ferries that the Russians are currently using to transport supplies to Crimea, because now it's been confirmed for the last few months the Russians have really tried to avoid using the Kerch bridge to transport utilities. I think they're just trying to train themselves to the reality that they might lose this bridge very soon, and so they have to start training and learning alternative routes, and that is also maritime ways. And so the Ukrainians destroyed two of them around the Kerch area, two very large ferries that the Russians were utilizing to transport fuel, armored vehicles, and other supplies necessary for the southern sector. And also in coordination with that attack with most likely American ballistics, the Ukrainians used the Mahura V5 kamikaze drones to strike a few Russian speedboats in Chornomorsk, which is on the complete opposite of the peninsula. So very, very good day. I know some of us were hoping that this was the Kerch Bridge, but it's still standing. But there's not much time left, I think, for the Kerch Bridge. And additionally, it would have been more valuable about a year ago if Ukraine had the weapons to really destroy it fully. Now, I think the Russians are completely realistic. They have adapted to the situation. We've talked about multiple times about the fact that the Russians have been building this railway line very close to the Sea of Azov. They have ferries, and so they're trying to adapt. And of course, the Kerch Bridge, although still valuable, is much less of an important target than it was, let's say, a year or even two ago, where the Russians were completely reliant on the bridge to transport all their supplies and men and vehicles to the front line. So this is very positive news, and I'll showcase you guys some images from yesterday's attack. And as you guys can see, here's a video that was released by the Ukrainian HUR confirming. So these are the Tunyats transport boats that the Russians have, and the Ukrainians confirmed that 4 of them were destroyed or damaged through the kamikaze drone attack. And here you can see the aftermath of one of the ferries. So 2 of them were hit, and one was called Conroe Trader and one was called Avantgarde. So this, I believe, was the Conroe Trader, a massive hole in the middle of the ship, and its hull is also completely destroyed. So it's very likely that it's a total loss for the Russians. And I've seen some pictures of this ferry, and it can transport, those heavy wagons and armored vehicles and even massive trains. So this is really a big deal for the Russians, and seeing how much panic there was on pro-Russian in the pro-Russian media space, it certainly is a big loss for them. So the Ukrainians, as you can see, are strategically striking Russia's ability to resupply itself, especially in the Crimean area, where they fully realize that the bridge, it's just a matter of time before it's completely destroyed. And losing ferries, losing these boats, and losing the ability to resupply themselves is a big deal for the Russians. So this is really good news. Now let's go to the next big development, and that is, of course, we've been talking about it for the last few weeks, and the frustration since especially the Russians started their Kharkiv offensive, their small offensive in the north of Kharkiv. And now Politico, so this is an article from Politico that confirms that the Biden administration has apparently given a quiet permission for Ukraine to strike inside Russia. Now there is, of course, an exception, as always, solely near the area of Kharkiv. So everything that is close to Kharkiv Oblast, the United States has quietly permitted the Ukrainians to strike Russian positions there. So I welcome these news if it's true. But again, let's face it, this escalation management policy from the Biden administration has been a total failure. And it's extremely frustrating. You know, you're seeing the obvious. You're seeing the Russian forces grouping right at the border, and you haven't given the green light when the Ukrainians were asking to strike them. And you said, no, we're not giving you the green light. Let them attack you, right? And I think only because there was so much political pressure, only because there was so much backlash, only because other countries in Europe took the stand and said, we are going to support Ukraine, we're going to permit them to use our weapons on Russian soil, did the United States actually budge? So, and again, an article came out, I think yesterday or today, which also indicates, we've talked about in my previous video, the Ukrainians hit Russia's nuclear deterrence institutions, like the radar systems deep within Russia. And now the United States apparently voiced concern that the Ukrainians have hit that. And again, they're voicing concern that, we're worried and it's too much of an escalation, right? And Ukraine is constantly crossing these red lines that supposedly Russia has. And what happened when Ukraine struck for the very first time, I believe a few weeks ago, this radar site deep within Russian territory? And now again, a few days ago, did Russia strike back with a nuclear weapon in Ukraine? No, they didn't, because it's a bluff, right? And Ukraine is constantly calling the Russians out on that. But it appears that the Biden administration is still very afraid. And this is very frustrating. It's putting Ukraine in a necessarily dangerous position where, now, of course, it's good that you're giving Ukraine the ability to strike back on Russian territory. But again, it comes with a string attached where you can only hit around Kharkiv area. And most likely that Ukraine needs to give 20 calls to Washington before they get the green light to strike something in Russia. So, and they're making it a much bigger deal than it should be. It's not a big deal to hit military targets in Russia. You guys understand, and it's evident. It doesn't take a smart rocket scientist to figure out that, it's obvious that Ukraine should be permitted to hit Russian military targets within Russia to make it difficult for the Russians to attack Ukraine. After all, are you really that committed to Ukraine's success if you're limiting Ukraine's success? That's the big question. So, although I'll welcome these news, it's certainly not something that, it clearly shows the lack of decisiveness within Biden's administration. You guys know me. I'm not a partisan, whether it be Republican or Democrat. I just like common sense decisions. And here, the very fact that it took over 2.5 years to even, give such a permission to me is astounding and complete hypocrisy based on what Russia's been doing in Ukraine with foreign weapons, with Chinese weapons. Let's face it, China's been helping Russia with lethal weapons, North Korean weapons, Iranian weapons, and here the United States has difficulty taking an obvious decision for almost 2.5 years. To me, it's ridiculous. And yes, of course, escalation management does have a place, but you've seen that Ukraine has tested Russia over and over again. And Russia simply is bluffing. It's clear. How many oil refineries does it take for Ukraine to burn in Russia to showcase that? How many railway bridges or tunnels does Ukraine have to burn? Or such as the Russian nuclear deterrence sites, right? And so I think it's very clear that the Kremlin is only doing nuclear saber rattling. And although we need to take that with seriousness, absolutely, nobody here is discounting Russian insanity because it does exist. But I think that Russia so far has not followed through with all of its threats. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, right? That's been their Joker card. But honestly, they just simply can't use it, right? Because that's going to impact them heavily after if they decide to go with the nuclear route. And even China has voiced a position that you absolutely cannot use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, right? They're not interested in that either, the Chinese, which are obviously the biggest backers of Russia right now. So you guys can let me know what you think about my comments here. But certainly it's bittersweet. These news are kind of bittersweet for me because we know that Ukraine, had it been given the permission even a few weeks ago to strike Russian positions in Kharkiv or close to Kharkiv Oblast, we wouldn't be talking about the situation right now that's ongoing around Vovchansk and north of Kharkiv city. Of course, the Russians didn't have a massive breakthrough, but still, this could have been avoided. And being fair, it's not just all in the West, in the United States. Ukraine could have been better prepared. And you guys know that I've been talking about it. There could have been better mining, better preparation. Some generals were removed from their positions as a result of this, Ukrainian generals, because they were saying completely wrongful, sit reps the situational report was that everything's perfect and we're all really well prepared, and as a matter of fact they weren't. So of course it's not all in the United States and Ukraine allies for this small Russian breakthrough in Kharkiv. Anyways, let's go to the last news, and this is some more positivity. So the Czech initiative, we've been talking about it since February, since the Czech president, Petr Pavel, announced that he will find about 1 million, or he's going to try to find about 1 million shells for Ukraine, because we remember that a few months ago there was the big scandal of Ukraine and the big financial military assistance bill not being passed in the United States Congress. And this really hurt the Ukrainians, because we know that this is mainly an artillery war, missile and bomb war, and it's pretty much the one that dominates in artillery, and the quality as well of artillery is the one that will win this war, absolutely. And the Czech president understood that, and he really tried to do the best he could to find allies that could pitch in to purchase over close to 1 million shells for Ukraine. So now some very good news. A lot of countries pitched in, including Canada and other countries. And now you can see that Czechia confirms that they will be providing Ukraine with 100,000 shells per month at the start, next month. So starting next month, Ukraine will receive a steady supply of shells. And here it's about either 50 to 100,000 shells per month, which is great. And we know that here, the country's representatives confirmed that they found about 500,000 155 millimeter shells and 300,000 122 millimeter artillery shells abroad. And they also located an additional 200,000 artillery shells, but did not provide details on the caliber or other details. So actually, there was some pictures that were spread around in Ukrainian media. Ukrainian soldiers already uploading essentially pictures of the new shells coming through, and you could see that some of them were from Asia, that is Pakistan, India. So I think that this is where Czechia and other countries were able to find these shells from, but this is just speculation. We don't exactly know, and I think that it's better that way. And also, this is following the great news that was announced, I believe, yesterday by Sweden. They're going to provide an AWAC plane to Ukraine, which is going to be phenomenal for the Ukrainians to direct the F-16s into much safer airspace, and as well just really being able to understand what's going on in the Ukraine airspace. So this is a huge deal, and a huge thank you for Sweden, because this is a really big commitment by Sweden to provide such a plane that Ukraine, I don't believe, ever had. And we know that the Russians right now are not using their A-50 AWAC planes, because Ukraine managed to down, I think, 3 or 4 of them in the last few months. And so they're definitely not risking it. That shows you how valuable this asset it is. So a huge thank you for Sweden. Of course, I've talked about Spain and many other countries that have recently pledged more help, including Belgium as well. I think they're going to provide an additional 30 F-16s. So you're seeing that the ball is rolling, and finally Europe has woken up. And finally you understand how Europe, it seems like, is committed to Ukraine's victory. Of course, there's the internal politics. It's not like it's going to be 100% commitment, but it's clear that Europe understands that Ukraine needs to win, because if it doesn't, they're under threat. And this is not just a question of Ukraine, it's a question of survival of democracy and not wasting away, the past and all of our past generations that fought for the values that we believe in. So it's really positive for me to see such great announcements from European countries like Sweden, Spain, Czechia, Belgium, the Netherlands. Of course, you have Norway, Denmark. The Baltics have always been very strong, France and Germany. So overall, you're seeing that Europe has woken up and is committed to Ukraine's victory. Now, before I end this video, I just want to go over the map quickly, and I'm just going to really focus mostly on Vovchansk area. So let's get to it. And of course, we've talked about the situation in Crimea, and I'm going to go north. So that is in Kharkiv. And you can see, guys, so of course, Deep State hasn't updated the map, but I've seen some announcements from pro-Ukrainian channels. So we have to be, of course, it's not confirmed, that the Ukrainians have managed to push out the Russians a little bit out of Vovchansk. And instead of the Russians controlling about 40 to 50% of the city, now they only control 30%. So the Ukrainians are counterattacking on the sides, and certainly I believe that next few weeks the Ukrainians could potentially kick out the Russians out of Kharkiv. I think this is a very likely scenario because we know that the Russians simply don't have enough forces committed in this direction. And I'm seeing a lot of positive news coming from specifically Vovchansk. Now, it's not going to be easy. It could take even longer. But I am seeing a wave of positive news. The Ukrainians are getting F-16s soon. The Ukrainians now are able to strike within Russian territory close to Kharkiv Oblast, meaning that all of these Russian divisions and battalions and other bases that are located really close to the border are not safe anymore, right? That was one of the issues. The Ukrainians saw it through drones and satellite images that the Russians were very close by the border and they weren't, they didn't receive the permission to strike these positions. Now, based on what I've shared with you guys, the Biden administration has given the permission, and it's just a matter of time before we see all of these Russian bases burning close to Vovchansk and Kharkiv city and pushing them away. Because if their logistics, their bases are destroyed in the rear, they cannot hold this territory for much longer, especially because there's still some Ukrainians within these territories. The sabotage, the pressure that the Russians will face is going to be massive here in the next few weeks, and more artillery shells coming through. So it's really going to look ugly for the Russians, especially here. And it's a good win. I really hope that's going to work out for the Ukrainians because Ukraine hasn't had, big gains or a big comeback in the last few months. So I think that this is also going to be a massive morale boost for the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian people, because everything that we've seen the last year has been just limitations, and strings attached on Ukraine, and basically Ukraine trying to fight this war with, their hands tied behind their back, which is of course, unfortunate. But I'm feeling like the pendulum is swinging back into Ukraine's side. So you guys can let me know what you think about this. So that's pretty much the video for today. There's not that many changes on the front line, from essentially Kupiansk all the way up to Zaporizhia. The battles are still fierce, but the Russians, I think they've culminated in most areas, right? Most of their gains are always a small field, a small posadka, but this is not the gains that you would expect from the world's second largest army and military. So I'll give you guys an update this weekend when things certainly will change, but so far the situation remains still stable, and we're seeing that the Ukrainians are really ramping up their ballistic attacks every other day. It's either Crimea or somewhere in Donbass, really far away in the rear, and maybe hopefully next few weeks we're going to be seeing the Ukrainians striking Russian positions in Russia, military positions of course, with ballistics, artillery, right? Especially I think it's going to get really hot for the Russians around Belgorod area, close to the border with Ukraine. So that's the video for today, guys. A huge thank you for your support, not only for this channel, but for the Ukraine cause. Your donations, your help is invaluable, and the Ukrainians are very grateful for that, and myself included. So keep going, keep helping the Ukrainians, do what you can do, because the Ukrainians need the help from all of you guys. So big thank you. Subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content. Leave me a comment, and I will see you guys in the next one. Slava Ukraini!